Hello, and welcome to the Gravel Ride Podcast, where we go deep on the sport of gravel cycling through in-depth interviews with product designers, event organizers, and athletes who are pioneering the sport. I'm your host, Craig Dalton, a lifelong cyclist who discovered gravel cycling back in 2016 and made all the mistakes you don't need to make. I approach each episode as a beginner to unlock all the knowledge you need to become a great gravel cyclist. This week on the show, I'm excited to have Lori Barrett. She's the U.S. Managing Director of Rotor Bike Components. Rotor is a Spanish company that was founded in the mid-90s that has been focused on pushing the performance of bicycles ever since. Most known for their cranks and power meters, the company also offers a hydraulic drivetrain. You heard me right, a hydraulic drivetrain. I had met the team briefly at the Big Sugar race in Bentonville, Arkansas last year, but recently had a listener reach out and mention they had purchased some Rotor cranks, and I was curious. I'd started seeing them around a bit, and I wanted to learn more about what the company had in store for us. So I was excited to dig in with Lori and talk all about the brand's history, about Lori's journey to becoming the U.S. Managing Director, and what else they have in store for us in the gravel market. After we finished recording the show, the team at Rotor reached out to me with something unexpected. They wanted to offer any Gravel Ride podcast listeners 20% off their orders. And you can simply visit rotoramerica.com for that discount. The code is TheGravelRide20. Before we jump in, I do need to thank this week's sponsor, Hammerhead, and the Hammerhead 2 computer. I know many of you are familiar with the Hammerhead 2 computer at this point. It's the most advanced GPS cycling computer available today, with industry-leading mapping, navigation, and routing capabilities that set it apart from other GPS options. The reason I'm confident in saying that it is the most advanced GPS cycling computer available today is because I get bi-weekly software updates from them. So I know they're constantly working on the platform and tweaking it based on riders' needs. So unlike other units, your Karoo 2 continues to evolve and improve, with each ride being better than the last. You can seamlessly import routes from Strava, Commute, and more. You can route, reroute, and create pin drop routing on the fly, all with turn-by-turn directions and upcoming navigation changes. You know I love the climber feature that was rolled out last year, so I can see in advance what's ahead of me, the elevation, the pitch, the grade, how long the climb is. This is super useful. And now with predictive path technology, it allows you to visualize and prepare for upcoming gradient changes in real time, with or without the route loaded. This is critical for me because I kind of, at this point, I know my range. I know at what grade I feel decent and what grade I'm going to suffer. So maybe I'm a glutton for punishment, but I love seeing what's out there ahead of me. For a limited time, our listeners can get a free heart rate monitor with the purchase of a Hammerhead Karoo 2 computer. Visit hammerhead.io right now and use the promo code TheGravelRide at checkout to get yours today. This is an exclusive limited time offer only for our podcast listeners. So don't forget to use the code TheGravelRide. That's a free heart rate monitor with the purchase of a Karoo 2. Go to hammerhead.io, add both items to your cart, and use the promo code TheGravelRide today. With that business behind us, let's jump right into my conversation with Lori. Hey, Lori, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me. Super excited to talk with you today.
Yeah, and I love that background you have there in Utah. It looks like you live in a beautiful place.
I do. I'm sorry. Probably all you're seeing right now are the beautiful puffy sky clouds kind of reflected in the window. But from what I'm looking at, I have a little screen and then I have beautiful meadows and mountains. So
Not
it's
a
not
bad
terrible.
spot.
Yeah, it's all right.
To start out the conversation, Lori, where did you grow up and how did you find the bike?
Oh gosh. So I'm from Austin, Texas, and even from college, like I had our household had an outpost for the Yellow Bike Project, so a San Francisco-based collective that tries to repurpose bikes and provide bikes for people that don't have them, basically. So even back then, we were all into bike culture, and my roommates all worked at bike shops, things like that. I was sort of a casual rider and commuter, for college and everything else, until a little later. And then somebody handed me a road bike, and I pedaled off. And the first official road ride that I did was like maybe 45 miles, which, not insignificant for a first ride, and kind of never stopped pedaling after that. Kind of just loved it. Ended up racing road bikes full time with an elite domestic team out of Austin, and ended up running that team and helping cultivate newer talent, some of whom are still out there, which is really cool. I saw you had Whitney Allison on your podcast. She was one of
Yeah,
my riders, and Lauren Stevens was on our team. Anyway, it's really cool. We had a great group of women that some of whom have stayed in the industry and continue to love and race their bikes. Yeah. Anyway, now I'm not fast anymore. I raced on the road. I raced on the track. I raced mountain bikes. I've done everything from match sprints to enduro mountain bike races. So
I love
kind
it.
of all forms of wheeled travel. I have a lot of commuters now. I think my next one's going to be an e-cargo bike, which I'm kind of excited about.
That's good.
Yeah. Anyway, all of it.
Nice stuff. So
Hmm.
that's amazing. So from your origins in Austin, racing on
Hmm.
the road,
Hmm.
you discovered a little mountain biking. When did you discover gravel riding, and how does that fit into
Yep.
what you enjoy doing?
Well, yeah, I was just talking with someone about this the other day. So our roads around Austin, I mean, what I loved about where I lived there is that I had from my house on the east side of town, I had loops that I could do that were 30 miles, 45 miles. You could kind of just add these kind of like farmland roads. And for us, the sign of a good ride, and we called them road rides, was basically what we call roubaix. So basically, caliche or gravel sections that we would spend miles on, because then you knew you didn't have traffic. So, and and also however many cattle guards you went over. That was the other hallmark. But so that was, we were riding, I mean, I don't know, probably 30% of our road rides, if you went over, 50 or 60 miles, were at least partially gravel. And so we were doing that on, back then, 23 mil tires. Kind of build your tolerance for a little bit of rough road. But yeah, so I would say that's when.
Nice. Yeah, I was listening to someone the other day, and they were talking about their experience as a road rider and
Mm.
riding dirt roads. I think it was out in
Oh
Boulder,
yeah.
Colorado, and
Hmm.
how now they're not affected in the same way others are when they're riding their quote unquote road bikes
Oh
in
yeah.
the dirt sections of BWR, for example, because it's something they've been doing for a while.
Yeah, decades. I mean, it's funny. Actually, I did a really fun road, a little bit in air quotes, out in Boulder, that included a fun dirt section, and I got to pet a wallaby. It was with some of the cycling tips guys, and actually, one of my, whatever my wins in my past, have been for as a bike racer, I got a top 10 on a Boulder road ride, and all I can say is that's probably one of the great achievements achievements of my professional cycling career.
Too bad they don't have a leader's jersey for that one.
I know, right? I'm sure I was bumped years ago now, but whatever. I'm still holding on to it.
So it sounds like you sort of went from a racer to a little bit of team management. And then how did you find your way into the bike industry
Oh
beyond the
gosh.
racing side of things?
Yeah. So, well, basically I'd been, racing bicycles, and I started off working for Cliff Bar, and I ran event and athlete sponsorship for them out of Texas. And after a few years of it, I felt kind of like it wasn't really challenging me professionally anymore. It's interesting. I mean, the simplified way to explain it is that I had a pot of money and a pot of product, and my job was to figure out strategic ways to allocate these things that supported the sales team ultimately. And in retrospect, it was actually a really good kind of strategic way to consider how you invest resources, and it kind of prepared me later for other things. But once I decided it was kind of time to move on, I ended up taking a job with a sales agency, so within the bicycle industry. And so I was a sales rep for someone else's agency. And after a couple of years of that, I left and I started my own. And after a couple of years of that, I had an offer to be a national sales manager for Reynolds, the wheel company, and
Yeah.
that's actually what moved me to Utah from Texas. So I sold my sales agency there. It still exists. I've hired them back for Rotor, which is pretty cool.
Nice. And just so
Yeah.
people understand, like a sales agency in the bike industry, as I
Oh yeah.
understand it, and
Uh-huh.
have observed it. You've got independent sales reps that can be hired by multiple brands at a time, and these are individuals that go to shop by shop in their territory and
Mm-hmm.
sell Reynolds wheels or Oakley sunglasses or Jira
Mm-hmm.
helmets, whatever they are, to the
Right.
shop owners.
Exactly. So, and thank you for clarifying that. It's the problem because non-endemic listeners, which I imagine most are, it would be a pretty kind of vague thing. Yeah, so like for instance, maybe my Texas sales reps work with Tifosi and Pivot mountain bikes and you know, Met helmets, and it's just kind of a package of brands, a portfolio really.
Yeah.
And they try not to have competing brands, so obviously they're not going to have Pivot and Yeti or whatever. Yeah, so it's that way they can work with all of the local bike shops. And like we're just talking about Texas, so usually the region depends on the territory, but like in Texas's case, it's Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Arkansas. So you have these four states, and so you have multiple sales reps and tech reps, and it's sort of its own little, it's an agency model. So
Yeah.
we had a few reps and a few tech reps, and tried to take great care of the bike shops with that.
Got it. So then you moved on to the company side with
Hmm.
Reynolds,
Hmm.
and then where do you go from there?
So with Reynolds, it was an interesting opportunity, and I learned a lot, running all the sales reps and kind of managing the positions I'd been in prior. But then when the position came open to be the managing director for Rotor, it was, kind of a chance to continue learning. I call it the do-it-yourself MBA. So it's a chance to keep myself from getting bored and keep kind of being able to pull more and more of the levers within a brand and within a company.
We'll come back to kind of your arrival at Rotor, but
Mm,
because the company was founded prior to that point, I imagine, let's
hmm
take a step back and talk about Rotor. And as you understand it, what was the inspiration behind starting Rotor? What products did they begin with? And then we could talk a little bit about how it's evolved and when you joined. It's a Spanish based company. So
hmm
obviously opening up and having a managing director in the US is a step in the progression. But let's start at the beginning. And what's Rotor? Why was it founded? What was it all about?
So you have a guy named Pablo Carrasco who is sort of like the mad scientist, and he wants to create solutions to problems. And the problem that he saw was the dead spot in riders' pedal strokes, right? So, if you look at like a torque analysis of your pedal stroke, not to get too data nerdy here, then obviously most people know that most of the force that they put down on a pedal is down. You aren't really able to pull, even with clipless pedals, maybe there's some amount that, is pulling up. But for the most part, that's not where you have a dead spot. Let's say if you're looking at a clock face between, you know, 7 and 9 p.m. on the clock face, where you're putting out very little force. So Pablo came up with a few different solutions, some of which were more commercially viable than others. So there was an entire rotor bike that had it had two spindles. Anyway, there's some bananas stuff that he had created, which is wildly efficient for pedal stroke, but also weighed 30 pounds or something absurd like that. So came up with the compromise of the Q rings, the rotor oval chain rings. And so with which basically are, everybody always thinks about it from the perspective of maximizing the force that you're able, or the use that you're able to get out of the force that you put downward. But really it's about decreasing the amount of time that you spend in the dead spot of the pedal stroke, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, I
mhm,
remember sort of, gosh, just being a fan of road racing. And
mhm,
I don't even know how many years this would be ago,
mhm,
25 years with Bobby
mhm.
Julich coming out with
Oh yeah.
riding oval chain rings and really
Yep.
espousing the virtue of, again, eliminating that dead spot in the pedal stroke to maximize the power that is in the non-dead spots.
Absolutely. And that was, it was really once, we started having adoption within the Tour de France, and we had, a winner in the yellow jersey, winner of the Tour de France, that it kind of became more, mm, you know, not socially acceptable, but that, it just kind of became more normalized, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's still, I've had people, if I'm in a group of people that don't know me or my affiliation with Rotor, what oval chain rings are, if I'm riding, people, I've had people say, "Oh, there's something wrong with your chain ring," and I'm like, because they're looking at it, and if you're just looking at it, I don't know,
Yeah.
it looks less round, obviously. So yeah, it's a funny thing.
And did he come at it from a scientific background and sort of identify like if we're measuring power around the pedal stroke that empirically speaking there is
Hmm.
this dead spot and you can improve one's power output via an ovalized chainring?
Yeah, and I mean, so his background is engineering. He's a mechanical engineer. And so he approached it from an engineering standpoint, but yeah, basically the same thing. What's interesting now is that our power meters all come with a software that includes a pedal stroke analysis. If you've ever ridden like the old school like CompuTrainers or something, there was a you could make a little peanut shape with your pedal stroke left and right, and what that was doing was measuring your power output on the left, your power output on the right, and that was the left and right halves of the peanut. And the split in the middle, the bifurcation, was basically the dead spot at the back of your pedal stroke. If you could pedal with 100% efficiency, then you would actually make a circle instead of a peanut, right? What's interesting, so we do, um, like, I don't know, at events and stuff, we'll have ones that people can hop on and just kind of play with. And like at Sea Otter, we did gold sprints for fun and prizes, which was super fun. But of course, if we're having an event set up, we have platform pedals on it, so people can just hop on in their sneakers. You can actually change the pedal to a platform pedal I'm sorry, excuse me, change the ring to an oval chain ring with the platform pedal, and you see the split, that bifurcation, go down. So basically, you see the reduction in time spent in the dead spot. You see kind of quantified the improvement in efficiency with the use of an oval chain ring. And like we make round chain rings also. So, but it's just an interesting anecdotal piece. I mean, if you're sprinting and you're going to stomp on it, or if you're on a track bike, a round ring can make more sense. But like time trialists all day long.
Yeah. Yeah, so interesting. So it started out, can you um, tell us what year it started out? So what year did the first rotor chainring hit the market?
So 25 years ago, so that would be now it's 26 years. Last year was our 25th anniversary. So that would be, let's see, so 1997.
Okay. And am I correct that it was in Madrid that the
That's
company
right.
was founded?
We're based out of Madrid.
Yeah,
Yeah.
gotcha.
And
And so why don't we trace a little bit of the evolution of the product line from that origin story of chain rings, and what was the next opportunities that he saw in the development of the product?
well, I mean, Pablo's goal has always been to make the most efficient, you know, to increase the efficiency for a rider within the context of enjoying their time on a bicycle. So, when something like a complete rotor system bike didn't really make sense, which it doesn't, then he started looking at other ways, avenues to bring that to light. So, one thing that we've seen a big rise in is the interest in shorter cranks. For your listeners who can't see me, I'm 5'4". Historically, when I was racing full time, I ran a 170 crank, 170 mil length crank. If I bought a extra small or a small mountain bike, it still came with a 175 crank. And,
Yeah.
it took me a while to figure out that the crank length for me really made a big difference in, like, I always say that, you're either a spinner or a masher in your pedal stroke style. And I tend to bounce around a lot. This is kind of how my brain works. So feel free to refocus me if that's helpful. But I'm a spinner, so I'm not like a pedal masher that's just like churning big gears. I'm not a big, powerful rider, kind of small. And so the way that I make power is I spin up a gear. And if my crank is too long, I can't turn it over quickly enough to generate the power I need to. And it's not like all of a sudden I become muscle type wise, like a mashing, a big, powerful rider. So it just means I'm actually fatiguing myself and less effective in my riding. So crank length, my long answer to that question is crank length became a thing. And then
Yeah.
as power meters, go
So
ahead.
that was I was just going to say, so that was an opportunity for them to convince riders that there was a reason to upgrade cranks
Hmm.
and build the case that Rotor is making a crank that is worthy of the upgrade. In those early
Hmm.
days, I imagine it was one of very few options that had multiple lengths, proportional
Hmm.
lengths
Yep.
available. You know, it used to be 170 and 175 were the only ones in town. And as longtime listeners of the show will attest, like we've had conversations, a lot of conversations about proportional crank lengths and the importance
Hmm.
and benefits of it. So totally get that. How did, when they started making cranks, was there something about the manufacturing process? What materials were they using that
Ooh,
were,
yeah.
again, in addition to attracting people to the length, what
Hmm.
were the other attributes that riders were considering when upgrading?
So here's something, well, first of all, weight, but something that I don't know if everybody knows, we actually manufacture in Spain. So everybody says, oh, designed in Italy. We actually have our factories in Madrid. It's pretty amazing. I mean, we're primarily from a country that isn't really a manufacturing country that much anymore. So going to a place, it's like going into Willy Wonka's, factory. It's amazing bike parts and like machines, like CNC machines and, lifelong CNC technicians that are milling these out. So,
Yeah.
kind of within that, so they came up with some of our older cranks were called 3D, and that actually meant for three drilling. So we use a 7 series and aeronautic grade aluminum. So it's a harder aluminum, which allows us to take out more material. It's more expensive, it's stiffer. A 6 series, which is what, like, for instance, most Shimano is made out of, and what our lower series cranks are made out of. That has a little more flex, and also you have to leave in more material in order to make it as strong. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the 7 series is allows us to take out the maximum amount of material, allows us to make a super light, super stiff crank. A couple years ago, we released a new modular system which took the total parts for a crank and ring set from 22 down to 14, which means you have fewer interfaces for creaking and, wobbling loose and all of the things that happen when you have interfaces. What it also meant is that it took, let's say, if a Dura-Ace crankset was 650 grams, it took it down to 600 grams, and that's still for alloy, so a very, very durable material. We do have some carbon cranks as well, and those are even lighter. I think on the mountain bike side, it's the lightest mountain bike power meter on the market. And on the road side, it's, I believe, the lightest next to something like a THM. So it's just, and half the price or a third the price. So it's just absolutely, as we say, it's sick light. So there's a pretty cool material story in addition to, yeah, and manufacturing in addition to the manufacturing. Yeah.
And when you think about selling carbon cranks, are there any concerns about durability, or is the way they're manufactured as durable as an aluminum crank?
I mean, to me, a carbon crank is almost never going to be as durable as aluminum. So that's
Yeah.
actually one of the things that I think increases the applicability for somebody that's riding on and off road combined. But, everybody's got a different set of considerations, maybe most of the gravel you ride isn't flying up and hitting your cranks. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's chunder or as we call it. Um, so perhaps a carbon crank is going to be just as durable. But really, you have to leave a lot of material. I mean, there are other crank manufacturers that do very heavy carbon cranks that are heavier than our aluminum cranks, and maybe those are as durable. But at that point, what's
Yeah.
the point? I mean, I guess you have the carbon look, but
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah. And then so it seems like with all that focus on chain rings and cranks, it was probably natural, although a giant leap, to start offering a power meter. Can you
Mm.
talk about sort of why the company decided to jump into that market and what perspective they brought that might have been different than other power meters that were out on the market?
Well, you have a few different pieces. One, it was becoming more common. Back when Pablo started the company, it was something that even professionals didn't have on their bikes, right? And then it was professionals, and then now it's just that, it's kind of a standard piece of equipment like a heart rate monitor was 20 years ago, right? So I think the fact that it became something that was going to be more within reach for consumers was important. But really, Rotor is all about performance and staying in line. We're working with these Tour de France teams. This year, of course, it's with Intermarché. We worked with Dimension Data for a long time, Israel Premier Tech, all of these teams, and they needed a power meter, and we don't want them running someone else's power meter, of course. So, yeah, so they started, but it was a huge project. I mean, and we partnered with Indra, which is a company that provides, strain gauges, basically the hardware for pieces of the Spanish government, which is pretty wild, to basically help us with the internals, and then we created our own software, and it pairs obviously with all the ANT plus Bluetooth, Wahoo head units, Garmin, you name it, all of them. But we wanted to have our own software as well. The other thing, and we already touched upon oval rings, of course, is that, um, again, not to like go too deep down a tech nerd hole, but it's if your rate of record for a power meter isn't frequent enough, it will give you an incorrect reading on an oval chainring. Because if you're only sampling data at 2 points on the chainring, well, because the chainring is not round and it's maximizing it here and minimizing it here, then it's going to not give you accurate power readings.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we needed to make a power meter that gave, that was actually reading essentially in real time. So our power meters have the most rapid rate of record of any power meter in the industry. I mean, in part by virtue of wanting to make sure we're giving accurate power readouts with one of our flagship products, e.g. the oval rings.
Got it. Got it. Taking a step back for a second, just to kind of set the stage, and I imagine I'm not alone in being a little bit less familiar with power meters.
Mm,
So I recall kind of originally there were hub based power meters and then later crank based power meters. How does the system actually work? Like where are those data points coming from
hmm
within the rotor system? And how maybe does that differ from people in the market's approach to getting power data?
Well, we have a few different models, so they re-record a little differently. But like if you take our twin power, which actually is one of the only power meters that's recording left and right data independently, right? Then there are two sets of paired strain gauges in the axle, two sets of paired strain gauges in the drive side arm, and they are reading the left and right leg, basically.
Okay, so that,
And
and
they,
just for clarity, that's in the crank axle and each
mhm,
crank arm, right? Okay.
right. And so one of the other interesting pieces is we were just talking about, boy, I feel like I'm getting so deep in the weeds here. Tell me, like I can go down this, but I'm like going back into material science. So one of the things you have is you always have material expansion and contraction. And so with temperature, right? That's just a thing. And so one of the pieces of programming that you have to account for in all of your power units is it's basically got a thermometer in it. I mean, it's the technology behind these things. It's to me it's kind of amazing. And you have accelerometers and all of the different pieces that allow it to provide incredibly reliable data. So to plus minus 1.5%, which is one of the most accurate on the market. And I was talking with the power meter engineer last year at Eurobike, and I was asking her about it. I was like, well, why don't, she's like, well, I was asking her why it's not more accurate, basically. She's like, well, if it were actually reading in real time, if we didn't do that power smoothing of 1.5%, then the numbers would change so fast you wouldn't be able to read them to use them. I was like, oh,
Right.
who knew? Yeah, so that we also have other units that are spider based, and so then it's a single sided with a virtual dual sided. Um,
Okay.
one of
So
the
in
other
that's
piece,
in that scenario with the spider based one, then
uh-huh,
it's making some assumptions
right,
around your left leg as well as your right leg.
correct. It's using fancy math.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one of the other pieces though is that you have to make sure that they're very impact resistant. All of our power meters are IPX7. We actually just released a new InSpider for, which is the spider-based power system, right? Um, the a new InSpider MTB for obviously for the mountain bike. And one of the cool things there, it's IPX7 Plus, I think is what it's called. IPX7 basically means it's a rating that tells you you can take it up to a meter underwater for up to 30 minutes before it'll be contaminated. So that means, especially if you're riding off-road, let's say in a gravel circumstance, if you have a creek crossing, you don't have to worry about contamination for your power meter. You're not going to short circuit anything. The electronics are all going to be fine. With the 7 Plus, it also means that it's sealed against really fine pulver, really fine dust, which might be really germane as well on an off-road circumstance, obviously.
To help us understand, like, so to get one of these power meters on your bike, you need to get a rotor crank set, right? So there's the two crank arm version
Hmm.
that you can replace your existing crank arm. With
Hmm.
the spider version, are you still getting that with a crank set?
Yes, so the interface is for our cranks. And um, I know there are other power meter brands that offer a single crank upgrade. We did that for a while, and it just it wasn't as good a system as providing the whole crank and power meter unit. I know there are also power meters that you can just replace the axle, but then you have problems. They all have their own problems. So we wanted one that was going to be as reliable and as accurate as possible. So we felt like the best solution for that was providing the whole crank and chain ring solution.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm.
So for your interest in the gravel market, I know you guys have been active out there at
Hmm.
various events,
Oh yeah.
both participating and having trade show booths there. What products are you seeing gravel riders kind of
Ooh.
focus on in your
Yeah.
lineup?
So I mean, the simple answer is like the cranks and the power meters. I mean, we do a direct mount chain ring that's a 4832. Again, this was part of the design award. Because the direct mount chainring is a single piece of milled. It's like a work of art, honestly. A 4832, which normally you can't do smaller than a 34 tooth ring on a spider-based system. That's why Shimano struggled for so long before GRX, right? Was that you have to have at least a 110 BCD, the bolt count diameter, in order to for their cranks, right? So we have the 40 4832. We have the 4630s, which are specific gravel gearings. We're also doing full one by ranges in that are 11 and 12 speed compatible. We launched last year universal tooth technology, which means it'll work with your Shimano 12 speed as well as your SRAM 12 speed as well as your you know, whatever you're running, rotor. So it's pretty cool because it seems so dorky, but the tooth technology is a little bit like an arms race. Each company is always trying to make something that no one else's stuff will work with to kind of lock you into a system.
Yeah,
And so to be able to have the intellectual property that allows you to kind of thread that needle, it's
yeah.
pretty cool. So one by rings that work with you know everybody's product. I mean, from a 28 all the way up to 58, honestly. It's pretty wild.
And does if one was looking to upgrade to a rotor crank set, do they need to replace their bottom bracket in order to do so?
Ooh, that's a good question also. So the easy answer is no. We make cranks in a 24 and 30 mil axle. Again, I kind of I'm like, how deep into the weeds am I going to go? But we make bottom brackets we use enduro bearings, and they're absolutely, they're just top, best in class. We manufacture all the shells and everything in Spain. Again, it's just really good quality product. And quite frankly, replacing bottom brackets is something that we should all do if you're riding a lot of miles multiple times a year. If you're not riding a lot of miles, at least once a year. And especially, we're talking about creek crossings, bottom brackets, anyone's bottom bracket after a creek crossing or two, take that apart. give it a little love. Anyway, your bearings will thank you. As a
So if
crank
I've got
manufacturer.
so if I've got a Shimano bottom bracket in there, it's a
Hmm.
1-to-1 replacement. Is that the
That's
same with
correct.
A SRAM Dub BB, for example?
So yes, it is. And so the Shimano only uses 24 mil spindle. So again, back into our fun materials science, a 24 mil spindle has to be steel. Rotor prefers the 30 mil aluminum simply because it's stiffer. Steel, of course, has flex. That's why we don't ride steel bikes anymore. And it's also lighter. Aluminum is lighter than steel. Um, the reason that Shimano likes the 24 mil spindle is that you can run a slightly bigger bearing size with that bottom bracket, right? Which adds to bottom bracket durability. However, you're talking a $30 a year difference in material costs as far as like replacing your bottom bracket if you went with the 30 mil more efficient, lighter aluminum spindle. That being said, we do make a 24 mil axle. It's just not our favorite.
Got it.
So if you
Got
were replacing it on your Shimano bottom bracket, you would replace it with the 24 mil axle version of our cranks.
it. While this next product I'm going to ask about isn't something that you guys are from intending from a marketing perspective to
Hmm.
be for the gravel rider, I think I'd be remiss in having a conversation with Rotor without talking about it. And that's your hydraulic drivetrain.
Oh, dude.
Can you kind of explain how that works?
Oh, it's amazing. And honestly, I feel like gravel is the best application, but
Okay.
this it's the I have a 1x13 setup on my gravel bike. Um, we had a rider win, the erstwhile gravel worlds on it a couple of times, a few years ago, and it's been raced at Unbound. It's been kind of raced in all of these
So
situations.
let's talk about what it is, because I think
Okay.
that won't be clear at this point. So
Yeah.
we're talking about a derailleur,
Uh-huh.
shifters,
Uh-huh.
cassette.
Yep.
And not only are we talking about those things, we're talking about the mechanism for shifting being hydraulic.
Hmm.
Like many of us are most aware of hydraulics with respect to disc brakes.
Yeah,
So
totally.
explain how a hydraulic powered derailleur works.
Well, so it's mechanical hydraulic, right? And so when you use the gear shifter, it basically triggers a little lever that then shifts the rear derailleur. And it's a one by system. It's a push-push system. So then when you go to shift up, basically there's the hydraulic fluid releases a little spring and then it like, goes up the cassette, right?
Okay, so we're
Um,
imagining sort of we've got a much like a brake uh,
mhm,
hose going through the frame. We've got a hydraulic hose going through the shift lever with mineral oil in it. When I throw the lever, I'm basically pushing that mineral oil, which is then shifting the derailleur up.
mhm,
And then as I'm releasing it via the lever, I'm kind of releasing a little bit of oil, ergo the
mhm,
derailleur
mhm.
shifting a little bit more.
Yeah. And so it's a closed system. So you don't end up with, like with a cable system, you end up with friction and replacing cables and all that.
Yeah.
I'm like, I get very, in most of my life, I'm very digitally involved, right? When I ride my bicycle, I'm pretty darn analog. Of course, I still have a power meter and I, occasionally bust out my head unit so I can see the numbers, although that's more depressing now than anything else. But I don't want to have to remember to charge my bike. Yesterday I was going to try and ride midday and then it started storming. So I didn't get to ride. I kind of threw a little tantrum and cleaned some of the house and then uh went out yesterday evening. And if I had kind of decided for a last minute ride without having charged my bike and then my bike's not, like my derailleur's not charged, how bummed am I? Like, it's one thing to have a power meter and I don't get to have my power readout, and that's just shame on me, but it's another thing if it keeps me from riding my bike. Anyway, so I'm just, I get kind of salty about it. I know.
When did the drivetrain get introduced, and are any
Mm.
of the pro road teams that you're working with riding on that drivetrain?
So we brought out the first one, which was called the Uno Group, in 2017, 2018. And long story short, the last year or during the pandemic, we sold 100% of production to a couple of European OEs, and so there were none for you know, for I mean, we had a couple like of individual athletes, but when you supply a pro road team, you're giving them 200 group sets. Like,
Yeah.
and that's it is because we manufactured 100% of the parts in Spain. Like, we're talking molding the hoods, like this is so far from like milling, CNC cranks, but you figure it out, you learn to do it, but so many parts that it is kind of it's a crown jewel, but it's also like a loss leader. It's not our bread and butter, if you will. Um,
Gotcha.
the other thing is, I think we saw a few years ago with the Acqua y Sapone team in one of the early spring races, you will pry a front derailleur from the roadies cold dead hands. Like, gravel riders a lot more flexible. I don't need a front derailleur, but like roadies, I mean, heck, they went on strike in the 90s when people made them start wearing, the UCI started making them wear helmets. Like, how long is it going to take them? I mean, tubeless technology, disc brakes. Anyway, like whatever.
So
We
true.
get to be the vanguard, Greg. Gravel
Yeah,
riders, mountain
I
bikers.
think it's super interesting. Just the hydraulic powered derailleur,
Oh, it's
powered
great.
as being powered's probably the wrong word, but
Yeah,
hydraulic
actuated.
activated,
Hmm.
actuated. There, I knew
Hmm.
I would get there.
Hmm.
Anyway, super cool, Laura. I appreciate the overview of Rotor. Put a link in the show notes to Rotor America's website so
Yep.
people can check out the crank sets, which I think, again, as we said, is probably the most interesting product,
Hmm.
particularly if you're interested in either considering a power meter or equally important, considering optimizing your crank length based on
Hmm.
your body type
Hmm.
and style. Rotor's a great option for people to consider.
It's some neat stuff. I mean, it's worthwhile to check out. We have a great customer service team out of Salt Lake City, technical support, um, and really, like kind of coming back to the power meters, it's again, for me, I just want to enjoy the experience of riding my bike, and sometimes I want data as well, but mostly I want to have something that's extremely reliable and, and doesn't get in my way, doesn't keep me from getting on the bike, certainly. And so for me, the power meters and the cranks, it's just set and forget. You leave it alone. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's fun.
right on.
Yeah,
Well, thanks for all the time, Lori.
yeah. Thanks for having me. It was great talking with you.
That's going to do it for this week's edition of the Gravel Ride Podcast. Big thanks to Lori for coming on the show and telling us all about Rotor bicycle components. Another thank you goes out to our friends at Hammerhead and the Hammerhead Karoo 2 computer. Remember, use the code THEGRAVELRIDE for that free heart rate monitor strap. If you're looking to connect with me, I encourage you to join the Ridership. That's www.theridership.com. That's a free global cycling community connecting gravel cyclists all around the world. If you're able to support the show, please visit buymeacoffee.com/thegravelride, or ratings and reviews are a free way in which you can help us out a great deal in connecting with other gravel cyclists around the globe. Until next time, here's to finding some dirt under your wheels.